Welcome everyone to this presentation of ADHD, Ferrari brain, and bicycle brakes. And now you may be looking at that title going, what in the world is he talking about? Well, that's exactly what we're going to go over. We are going to explore ADHD and similar conditions from a different perspective. And so thank you for joining us, and let's get started. So our goal is to understand a couple of key ideas, and that is, one, where does ADHD really come from? Two, how is your nervous system fitting into this equation? How does your nervous system, how does it contribute to our issues that we see with ADHD? And what can you do about it? Whether you are a parent, a grandparent, some kind of caregiver to either a child who has been diagnosed with ADHD, a concerned parent who is worried that your children may be diagnosed or something like that, or maybe you yourself have had issues with attention issues all your life, and you're looking for a better answer. All right. So who am I? I am Dr. Brendan Halls, and the name of my practice is Connection Chiropractic. We're located in Wheeling, West Virginia. We are a very unique chiropractic practice. We see pregnant mothers, whole families, babies, toddlers, kids of all sizes, and we are in the business of tuning people up and making sure that they can reach their health and wellness potential. And now that may be a different message than what you're used to hearing about from a chiropractic perspective. We encourage you, if you have any questions, to look over our website. Maybe you're watching this on YouTube. Our website is www.connectionchirowv.com, and feel free to reach out to me and ask any questions that you might have. We operate on several principles here in the office. One is that everybody can benefit from chiropractic, and my purpose here with this presentation is to show you why that's possible and why it works the way it does. We also have a mantra is that we don't guess, we test. And so I'm going to show you some of our testing procedures and how we actually figure out whether or not we can help people. And we also operate from the mindset that all adjustments, because they're given in a way that is always appropriate for whatever the person that we are working with, are gentle, safe, and effective. And chiropractic care is incredibly gentle, it's incredibly safe, and it's incredibly effective. And so, again, if you have any questions about that, don't hesitate to reach out to me, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. But again, for this presentation, we're talking about ADHD, and before I get into that, again, my practice focuses on pediatrics, pregnancy, and family wellness. We have the mantra that, if you can keep kids healthy, then they grow up into healthy adults. Our office helps children of all ages with all kinds of health challenges. And again, in the process of going through this presentation, we're going to talk about why chiropractic makes such a difference with these folks. But we see lots of kiddos and everything who have been diagnosed with ADHD, allergies, anxiety, asthma, autism, Asperger's, acid reflux, all those types of things. We also care for kiddos with issues with seizures and constipation, and we see lots of ear infection kiddos, and we see lots of bedwetting issues, and the headaches and the learning and behavioral disorders and all those types of things. And again, my purpose in this presentation is to explain why chiropractic can make such a difference with these kids, and not from a treatment perspective, but from the perspective of getting to the root cause of the underlying issues. Okay, so let's really get into it. What is ADHD? And I think everybody understands that ADHD is an acronym that stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. There's a link there for the official diagnosis standards from the CDC. That link will also be in the description below. If you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're watching this on our website, there'll be a link to that below. You can explore that website to your heart's content, and you can find lots of information about how that diagnosis is made and everything like that. My contention is that it's not a deficit, nor is it a disorder. What ADHD and associated issues really are is a situation where we have a child or an adult with a brain and central nervous system that has a Ferrari engine with bicycle brakes. And you can imagine what a catastrophe that would be if you had a high-performance machine that was not able to stop. And again, these beautiful, beautiful cars. Imagine if they had those caliper brakes for, I think they're caliper brakes. Anyway, imagine if they had that type of braking mechanism when they were screaming down the highway at 120 miles an hour or something like that. So that is the image that I want you to have in your mind when we think of children who are suffering with these challenges from, again, ADD, ADHD, attention issues, things like that. Okay. ADHD has two components. One is sympathetic overdrive, and the second is a poorly organized nervous system. We're going to go over this in detail. Both of these components must be addressed, and they must be addressed in that order. The sympathetic overdrive has to be addressed before you can address the poorly organized nervous system. Must slow the nervous system down so that it can assimilate information better and then grow it to be healthier, stronger, more adept at dealing with issues from the outside world. Anyway, so the first component, sympathetic overdrive. Okay, sympathetic overdrive is, just like as it says, triggered by stressors, be they physical, chemical, mental, emotional stressors from the environment. What's a physical stressor? Physical stressors can be anything from, kids falling out of trees and doing all the things that kids do, running around the house and knocking their heads on tables and things like that, to the less violent stressors, but equally damaging of poor posture, always looking down at their cell phone or their iPad or something like that. Physical stress comes in lots and lots of different forms. And it's the one that we think of the most, but also we can have issues with chemical stresses, what we eat, what we're exposed to in our environment, what we drink. Those types of things can have a profound effect on the function of the nervous system, shifting things into sympathetic overdrive. And again, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty details of that in a second. Also, mental and emotional stresses can also, thoughts are things, and they have a profound effect on the shift into sympathetic overdrive. What is the sympathetic nervous system? Quite simply, when we look at the human nervous system, we can break things into pieces and parts to more easily categorize pieces of the nervous system and what they do and how they do it. And so the sympathetic nervous system, you can think of, whenever I say sympathetic, you can think of either survival or gas pedal mode. So the sympathetic nervous system is designed for survival. You may have heard of fight, flight, and freeze, and that's exactly what this part of the nervous system does. It is useful for high-intensity, stressful situations where, again, survival is the main goal. It's only intended for short periods, and the reason it's only intended for short periods is because it has the following effects. One, increased cortisol, increased catecholamines, increased heart rate, increased vasoconstriction, increased blood pressure, blood sugar, blood fat, blood cholesterol, increased clotting factors, increased insulin resistance, increased feelings of stress, fear, anxiety, depression, increased sensitivity to pain and other stimuli, and also bone loss. Okay, well, that's quite a bit of, there's quite a large amount of different things that are happening there. At the same time, we also see in a stressful situation decreased short-term memory, decreased ability to concentrate, decreased ability to learn new material, decreased serotonin levels, decreased cellular immunity, decreased growth hormone, and decreased testosterone. And even though this part of the nervous system is only intended to be activated for short periods of time, I will argue that most people, probably 95 to 99% of the people walking around in this world, are stuck in survival mode, especially in our high stress first world type of civilization that we live in. Maybe if you're in Central Africa and stuff like that, you're not walking around in sympathetic dominance all the time. But the kids that are sitting in class all day long, stressed about their tests that are coming up, and stressed about who's posting on their Facebook wall and all this other kind of thing, and stress about how they're going to get into college and whatnot. Those kids are stuck in survival mode. They're stuck in fight or flight, and their parents are as well. So again, when I say sympathetic, you can think of gas pedal, you can think of survival mode. It's only intended to be used for short periods of time. So what's the flip side of that? The flip side of that is the parasympathetic nervous system. This is part of the nervous system that regulates growth and development. We should be in this system a majority of our time that we are alive. Literally, your body, your nervous system, this is our default state that we should be in. And again, if you're stuck in sympathetic dominance, you cannot be stuck in parasympathetic dominance. So when your foot's on the gas all the time, it's impossible to hit the brakes. And the parasympathetic nervous system has a huge effect on immune, the digestive system health, and also the endocrine, the hormone systems, heavily influenced by the parasympathetic nervous system. So it's critical that this system be given a chance to function at the highest level, and that the sympathetic system not be on overdrive all the time. Okay, so again, kind of another illustration of what this looks like. If we think of the sympathetic on one side of the teeter-totter and parasympathetic on the other side, well, we want the parasympathetic to be the side that's heavily weighted, and sympathetic is useful in those times of extreme stress. We always use the example of a tiger jumping out at you while you're taking a drink at the watering hole, but you don't want that tiger chasing you all day long, day after day after day, and be stuck in the fight-flight response, be stuck in protection and survival, be stuck in the stress response, and have your adrenal glands activated all the time because you are wired then for stress. Down the bottom right-hand corner there, you can see another quote that we live by, and that is, you can't be in growth and protection at the same time, and that is absolutely true. When you are on the gas, you cannot be on the brake. When you're on the brake, you're less likely to be on the gas. So everything we do is about helping these kids who are stuck in sympathetic dominance get out of that and get into parasympathetic dominance. Okay. And again, when we're going to go over this in more detail here in a minute, but the gas pedal sympathetic dominance has to do with misalignment, tension, and fixation, or being stuck, certain areas of the spine being stuck in what we call subluxation. We'll go over that in detail here in a moment. Activates the stress response, and the nervous system, the master system, the control system, the regulation system of the body, gets stuck in fight or flight. And the result of that is all of those different things that you see, written in there below. When the brake pedal is activated, then rest, relaxation, digestion, immune function resume, and growth, healing, and development are restored. Again, you cannot be in growth and protection at the same time. So we have to take our foot off the gas and apply the brake. Okay. We mentioned just a few minutes ago the different physical, chemical, mental, emotional stresses. And you can think of stress as a tachometer, where each stress kind of builds on the last one. So if you have physical stresses in your life, but then you tack on the chemical stresses in your life, and then you tack on all the mental and emotional stresses in your life, you can see that quickly, our RPM, so to speak, can go up and up and up, and we can get overwhelmed with stress. And so the more of those different stressors we can take away, the better the situation is. Okay, so again, I hope I've, at this point, laid out the argument that ADHD is excessive sympathetic activity based on the physiological response that we have to stress in our environment. And what we find is that a huge component of the physiology of the kiddos that we see with ADHD diagnoses is this hyperactivity, this impulsiveness, these behavior issues, and again, that's all a hallmark of that excessive sympathetic activity. Okay, and I mentioned a few slides ago that one of the things that we absolutely live by is this idea that we test. And how do we test? Well, we look at things like this, and what this this diagram is really showing is showing a scan of a 12-year-old, and what you see here is the black line on either side represents the values that we get after testing this child's muscle activity, where they're sitting in a chair, they're holding themselves up into a upright posture. They're literally holding themselves up against gravity, and we're able to measure through their skin. We're able to measure the amount of activity in the muscles in the structural component of their spine on either side, and we're able to compare one side to the other, and we're also able to compare how those values how they correlate or how they compare to what we would consider normal or ideal, which is the white area on both sides, kind of shaped like a pear. And so you can see that some of those values, as we go in the top area of the spine, some of those values are outside of that white area, into the green and even into the blue. And then if we go down to the bottom, we see that some of those values are less than what we would hope or what we would expect. And so they're actually yellow. So what we see is a nervous system that is very much out of tune, a structural core in this young man that is very out of tune. And one of the things I want to bring your attention to is this number right down here, which is total energy. That number should be closer to 100. And that would be an ideal situation. And this young man has 3 times the amount of energy surging through his structural core than what is necessary to keep him upright. And so we see this. We see a system that is confused, and we see a system that is running at a higher frequency. We see a system that is working much harder than it needs to hold this young man upright. And so it makes sense that he would exhibit some of the different signs and symptoms or signs and signals of that stress response, that sympathetic overdrive. Okay. The second component, a poorly organized nervous system. And what does that look like? Well, this is where we have issues with attention, confusion, and challenges with organization. Actually a bunch of my colleagues, and I would agree with this statement, is that sensory processing and integration get off track with these kiddos. So lots of kids have been diagnosed with ADHD, and it's really a sensory issue. And some of you listening or watching this probably can relate to that. You probably see that in your children, and the only way to address those sensory processing issues is to actually look at how the nervous system is processing information. And so we see a situation where these kiddos have brains that are spinning so fast, that are working so fast, that Ferrari engine that we talked about earlier, they can't slow down because they have bicycle brakes to go through those normal development processes, whether that be social, academic, behavioral, physical, speech, those kinds of things. And so we see another case here where we have a 9-year-old child. This time their total energy is much better. It's at 140, but now they have a pattern score, which is literally the way that we assess organization in that person's spine and nervous system. Their pattern score is half of what it should be. So it makes sense that this child is having issues with integrating their sensory information that they get from their environment and having their brain be able to process it correctly and efficiently. Okay, and so you're probably wondering at this point, well, so how does my spine fit into all this? I'm a chiropractor, so how does an attention issue, how does a problem with integration of information from the sensory system, how does that work into the spine? And what most people don't know or have never been taught is that your spine is much more than bones, muscles, and ligaments. Your spine is a living organ. It has to function properly, and your spine does a bunch of different things. One of the things it does is, of course, it protects and supports the nervous system, but it also acts as a tensioning system for the nervous system, a way to keep the correct tone and the ideal tone in the nervous system, and that's really important. Okay. And one of the reasons is really important because one of the most common things we see in my practice and in practices all over the world is birth trauma. And most people, this is something that is not well known, but birth trauma is extremely common. And almost all of the neurodevelopment cases that we see in this office and in offices, again, all over the country and world can be traced back to the trauma of birth. If you're not aware, it's important to understand that nearly half of births these days are C-sections or some kind of intervention type of birth. And so maybe your own birth or maybe the birth of your son or daughter was a C-section or had some kind of intervention. The issues with C-sections, there's several. One of the issues is that because the baby is coming out of the abdomen instead of the vagina and everything like that, there is a vacuum effect that is created when a child is being birthed through the birth canal and everything. Everything is moving that child down. The mother is moving. Her uterus is doing the things it needs to push that baby out. The baby is moving and everything. When the baby comes out of the abdomen, that's not a natural thing, even if it's necessary. It's not a natural thing, and so because of that, there's a vacuum that's created, and to pull the baby out, you have to overcome that vacuum. And so you see that 60 to 90 pounds of pressure. What that's indicating is that the average child born these days via C-section has 60 to 90 pounds of axial tension or pressure put on their spine. And everyone knows that one of the first things you do when you pick up a baby is to support that very delicate neck structure. And because they have big heads and small necks and they're very floppy and all that kind of thing. And, the way that I describe it to folks is I have a little, baby doll in the office here. And imagine if I strapped even a 45-pound plate to that baby and just kind of swung it around a little bit and I held onto its head. There's no way that people would consider that to be a good way to hold a baby, yet this is a very common experience, one of the first experiences that these children have as they come into the world. And so it makes sense that they would be subluxated, and we're going to talk about that word and what it means here in a minute. Even if you don't use C-sections, there's high levels of use of Pitocin and epidurals, and those are proven to increase stress on baby and mom. They're also proven to increase the likelihood of forceps or vacuum extraction, which again, in this diagram, you can see that, the baby's being born out of the vagina and quote unquote a normal birth, but those forceps look extremely damaging, and he's obviously putting a tremendous amount of axial traction using those forceps. And so we can see very quickly or very easily how birth trauma can happen. Okay. In the 1980s, there was research that was done by Dr. Gottfried Gutmann, medical doctor, who found that in those days that spinal injury was present in 80% of the 1,000 infants that he examined shortly after birth, which that spinal injury caused interference or disturbance to the neurologic and immune function of those children. And again, so birth trauma to especially the upper cervical, the upper neck area of these kids affected things like their brainstem and how it was functioning. And he concluded that all children should be examined after birth and adjusted by a chiropractor if necessary. And because this research was done in the 80s, I would argue, and again, my colleagues would argue as well, that that number, because the rate of C-sections and other interventions is going up and up and up, that number is probably closer to, actually it's probably closer to 95%. In all the kids that I've checked shortly after birth, it's very, very rare to find a child, even in a perfect situation, who wasn't subluxated at birth. It's just a very common occurrence, and it needs to be dealt with. And a lot of times, because it's a very subtle thing, because of that, it goes unnoticed, and that's tragic. And so, again, here we see another diagram of a C-section. You can see doctors reaching their hand in. The first thing they're going to grab is the head, and you can imagine as they pull that baby out, there's going to be a significant vacuum created there. Some more research, this time by Dr. Viola Fryman, who is an osteopath. She examined 1,500 newborns within 5 days of birth and found that 90% suffered from some level of birth trauma. 10% had no birth trauma. 10% had severe trauma that was evident to even untrained observers. And then 80% of those children had some level of very slight or hardly noticeable strain in their skull and cranial articulation. So they were, subluxated in their upper neck, how their skull was moving on the upper part of their neck. And the picture here is showing a child with torticollis, and this is a very common occurrence as well. And what we're seeing here is a situation where there's an imbalance in the tension in the muscles on either side of the neck, and so one side clamps down. Child isn't able to turn their head. They're not able to do a whole lot really. And in severe cases, that child might end up having their neck muscle cut in order to allow that head to resume a normal position. And what we see as chiropractors is a child who has a neck and a spine in that upper part of the neck that's out of tune. And so when we see this, one of the nice things about torticollis is that it's really pretty obvious. You know it when you see it, and lots of folks have seen a kid who couldn't turn their head. Many times, the subluxation is much more subtle, and you really need to have somebody who is trained specifically in checking children and things like that to actually check that child and to determine whether they're subluxated or not, and if they are, to get them adjusted. Okay, we'll turn up the volume here a little bit. So again, where does it start? And this video that I'm going to show you here, if you're a little squeamish, then you probably don't want to watch this video, but this is a video of a C-section being done. And the World Health Organization says there's no reason why our C-section rate in the U.S. should be over 5 to 10%. And in my home state of West Virginia, the published results that I've seen is about 37.5%. Our local hospitals don't publish their rates. Maybe you live in an area where they do publish the rates. If you are pregnant or thinking about becoming pregnant and you're concerned about this aspect of birth and delivery, I highly recommend that you research those rates so that you know what you can expect when you go into the hospital and things like that. So we're going to watch this. We're going to watch this video.
Irritated. Oh, there you go, fella.
Come on, buddy.
All righty. Ears of a girl. Ears of a girl. Make you cute for the camera.
Oh, yeah. Keep coming back.
There you go.
All right.
Look at those big old testicles, though. Bottom of a boy. Bottom of a boy.
Yeah.
Well, he sure had a big head here. Yeah, that was the problem. The head.
Okay, so several things. One, they're concerned about head size and that kind of thing. And I always ask mothers if they think their body is dumb enough to produce an offspring, a baby that has a head that's too big to get out of their body. And I have yet to have a mom say, I think that's possible. And so I would argue with that doctor that just is a very, very rare occurrence, and chances are that that procedure was done because other steps in the normal birth process had been sidestepped or interfered with somewhere along the way. And the one thing I really want to point out is how nonchalant this particular doctor is about grabbing that child's head and pulling it out of mom, and how easily he tipped their head from one side and put the ear directly on the shoulder, and then went to the other side and put their ear directly on their shoulder. And isn't it amazing that they don't understand what kind of damage they can do? But you literally watched a child become subluxated. You literally watched a child have birth trauma, and I think it's really, really important to show how quickly that can happen. And because this OB is not likely to see this child again, they're not going to see the repercussions of that damage. The pediatrician will, but because the pediatrician's not in the delivery room, they probably don't make the connection between birth trauma and what they see as a pediatrician. So there's a disconnect there. And as chiropractors, we look at that and say, oh, okay, well, that makes total sense, because you wouldn't want to pull a child out necessarily by their head. Certainly, if you could prevent that, that'd be a good thing. But if you had to pull them out by their head, you'd want to get them checked as quickly as possible after birth, so that they can you can make sure that their spine and nervous system is functioning at the highest level, and there isn't any kind of disturbance to that function. Okay, so now we get to talk about that subluxation thing that I've been mentioning throughout this presentation. And we're going to go through this because subluxation is what makes chiropractic unique, and an understanding of subluxation is key to understanding how what we do affects the central nervous system, especially when it comes to sympathetic overdrive, like we've talked about. So there's three main components to being subluxated. Subluxation, or being subluxated, occurs when a spinal joint becomes misaligned and stuck. It loses its ability to move through a normal range of motion. So kind of like this hinge is out of alignment, and in addition to being rusty, but ignore the rust for a second. It's out of alignment, and so that door is not going to swing correctly. It's going to be less functional than if the hinge was properly aligned. And so that's the kind of situation that we see in a person's spine. And with this diagram that just came up, on the right, you see what's obviously an aligned spine. You can see that yellow area in the diagram is the top bone in the neck, which is called the atlas. And you also see that red area, which indicates that that's very close to the brainstem. In fact, it is the brainstem. So when we have a misalignment up at the top part of the spine, at the top part of anybody's spine, but especially in a baby. And now understand that the diagram here is for an adult spine, but similar things are happening in a baby's spine. If we have that misalignment, that loss of proper alignment and motion with an infant, with a newborn, now we have a situation where it's putting tremendous stress on the brainstem, and it's interfering with the flow of information from the brain down to the rest of the body. And that's incredibly important, especially the younger a child is, the more important it is that they have a proper flow of information throughout their body, because the longer they are subluxated, the less potential they actually have and to express health and well-being. So and from this diagram, being able to go back to the video that we just watched, it should be pretty obvious that the stresses that doctor was putting on that baby's neck would lead to a situation where things are misaligned, especially at the top part of the spine, because that's where he was using. That was what he was using for leverage to get the baby's shoulder out of the mother's abdomen. So again, this is something we see very, very commonly. It's is incredibly underdiagnosed, and unfortunately it goes without care. So the third component to a subluxation is neurological imbalance. And we've been hinting at this the entire time, but now we're going to go through it. So dyskinesia, we're going to go through these 5 Ds here. Dyskinesia leads to is a loss of normal alignment and motion in those particular joints of the spine. That dyskinesia leads to what we call disafferentation. Disafferentation is abnormal neural input into the brain. And the problem becomes that the brain can only act on the information that it's getting from all of the different senses that are being utilized. And when we think of senses, we often think of, sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. But we also have other senses, and we also have this sense of movement sense. We have this sense of what we call proprioception, the ability for your brain to recognize where all the other parts and pieces of your body are in space at any time, even when you have your eyes closed and you can't look directly at them and all that kind of thing. And so if the joints of the spine are out of alignment, it interferes with that neural input into the brain. And if we have a garbage in, garbage out philosophy, then obviously that's going to lead to issues with how the brain interprets its world. And that's incredibly important, especially, again, when you are in the early stages of development, and that's exactly where babies are. Dyskinesia leads to disafferentation, leads to dysautonomia. And dysautonomia is the sympathetic overdrive that we've been talking about. It's a shift in the balance of the nervous system. Leads to dyskinesis, which is abnormal energy output and control. So the scan that we looked at where we're talking about the postural control that child had actually should have and had lost. They had chaos in their nervous system, and because of that, they were using more energy than was necessary, and their energy was out of balance, and they were just wasting energy, things like that. And so all of those Ds, dyskinesia, disafferentation, dysautonomia, dyskinesis, lead to ultimately disconnection. An out-of-tune spine and nervous system will influence all the rest of that person's their physical well-being. And again, when somebody's out of tune, especially a child, they will often exhibit those symptoms and signs and signals of things like ADHD, or what's commonly considered ADHD. So again, we have this 5D model, and I don't really care if you remember the 5Ds. That's not really important. What you need to understand is that there's this cascade of different issues. It's not just one thing that goes wrong, but it all starts with how well is that person's spine functioning? How well does it move, and how well does it set up the structure of the nervous system? Okay. And whether you know it or not, your brain is fed through movement. And so it's incredibly important that all the pieces and parts of your spine move correctly, because that's the way your brain gets its nutrition, essentially. Okay? And so 60% of the nerves that pick up this movement sense, this movement nutrient, are in the spine, and they're not distributed equally. 33% are in the upper neck alone. And again, if we talk about the most common birth trauma is being pulled out by the head, and it's going to lead to issues with the upper neck. And if 33% of the brain's ability to sense where it is in space is up in the upper neck, then obviously if that's out of alignment, you're going to have big problems. Main job of over half of the neurons in your spinal cord and spine is to carry movement information, and truly movement is life. Okay. So, the power in the chiropractic adjustment. A chiropractic adjustment restores proper alignment and movement. So we have addressed the dyskinesia portion. If we address dyskinesia, then we also will restore proper incoming flow of proprioception or movement sense into the brain, which addresses the disafferentation. And that helps to balance out the autonomic nervous system, which calms down the sympathetic. So we shift out of sympathetic overdrive into parasympathetic dominance. So that takes care of the dysautonomia. And then finally, it also restores the energy output and organization to normal levels. So it addresses the dyskinesis component, the abnormal energy output and organization. And so that will reconnect that person to themselves, essentially. Again, super, super important, especially for all kids. But again, babies, amazingly important. So the question becomes, how do I know if my child might be subluxated? The only way to know is to test. This is not something that you can feel. There are lots of different ways to test. In our office, we use the latest technology available to assess the spine and nervous system. And you know, if you are out of the area and you need help finding somebody that uses that technology, please get in touch with us. We'd love to help you find a chiropractor for your family and to help you get the testing that needs to be done so that you can make an informed decision about your child's health and well-being. The testing that we do requires no radiation. We don't have any x-ray in our office. That's a conscious choice because we take care of a lot of pregnant women and we take care of a lot of kids, and you just don't x-ray those folks. And so no needles, no pain. The tests are simple and quick. And the tragic thing is that most people have never had these done by any other doctor, for sure. And sometimes the worst thing that will happen during the testing is that there's, it can tickle a little bit. So we call it the tickle machine with the little kids. Again, safe to use with pregnancy, newborns, infants, as well as adults. Okay. To sum up, ADHD has two main components. We talked about in depth the sympathetic overdrive and also the poorly organized nervous system. Your spine becomes important because it's the middleman between your brain and your body, and it houses and protects and serves as a tension regulation system for your nervous system. I like to think of it as your spine acts as the tuning pegs on a guitar, and your spinal cord and all the nerves going from your brain to the rest of your body are like guitar strings. And if those strings, if the tension is too high, if it's off at all, either too high or too low even, it's going to affect the music. It's going to affect the expression of that intelligence through the nervous system. And I use this analogy with my folks all the time. But if you hand an out of tune guitar to, say, Eric Clapton or Keith Richards or Jerry Garcia or whoever you would consider one of the best guitar players of all time, if you hand them an out of tune guitar, before they ever start playing the guitar, they're going to tune it first. Because if they know that if they don't, then an out of tune guitar plays out of tune music, regardless of how good the guitar player is. And so it's impossible to be your very best with an out of tune nervous system. That's just all there is to it. And so what we do as chiropractors is we tune the nervous system. And again, because the two ADHD components are controlled by your nervous system, doesn't it make sense to get it checked? Absolutely. One of the things we also say in the office is if your spine was on your face, you'd take better care of it, and that's absolutely true. It's often out of sight, out of mind, and most people don't think of their spine until something hurts or they have some kind of problem. And by that point, it's not too late, but it's very late in the process. We want to make sure that every child, especially, has a fully tuned spine and nervous system. Another question that comes up, what would I do if my child had signs or symptoms of ADHD? I do a few things. First and foremost, I would get them to see a pediatric chiropractor. Again, have that child checked by a pediatric chiropractor who uses technology specifically designed to measure and track the components of subluxation, just like we've talked about, the three components: the misalignment, the loss of proper motion, and of course the neural imbalance, the neurological imbalance. Absolutely critical. And those first two components you can check with motion studies and things like that. But the last component you cannot check reliably, in my opinion, without the technology that we've talked about. Two, and this goes into the supplemental information or the second video that will be available here. but clean up the diet and their environment. We live in a toxic, polluted environment, and especially these kids. You can always have more veggies, and making sure that they are staying away from pesticides and dyes and preservatives and chemicals, because those are all stressors to an already stressed out nervous system. Avoiding dairy and grains and sugar is really critical. Lots of these kids have monumental improvement when they go on a gluten-free, casein-free diet. And again, there's more information in the supplemental video that will be available and linked in the description of this video. Number 3 is supplements, and it used to be where people could get everything they needed from their diet and they didn't need to supplement, but frankly those days are over. To really live at the top level that people are capable of, supplements are really critical, and there's 5 that I've listed here. Again, not everybody's going to have the same 5, but that's okay. My suggestion is to start where you can, and the quality counts. Having a whole food multivitamin, good quality. We're not talking something that you can get off a Walmart shelf, and I apologize for that, but it's true. You get what you pay for. And so a whole food multivitamin, a good omega-3 fish oil source for the omega-3s that are so critical to brain health and development, a probiotic so that the gut flora, the gut bacteria are strong and robust and healthy. Again, has a huge effect on the rest of the nervous system. If the gut is out of tune, the rest of the nervous system is out of tune. Vitamin D, especially here in West Virginia, we don't get nearly enough sun, and we can always use some more vitamin D, especially during the winter months. So getting a good supplement with vitamin D in it. And then also for brain health, we recommend EHT, which is a product from Neurium, but there are other supplements as well. If you have any questions about that, feel free to get in touch with us. Play. Lots and lots of kids are stuck indoors all day long. Kids need to be able to play. They need to be able to move, because movement is life. They need to be able to exercise. One of the things that we recommend highly here is CrossFit Kids. If you are familiar with CrossFit Kids, gets kids moving, makes it fun. I can't say enough good things about CrossFit in general. I've definitely drank the Kool-Aid, but even things like martial arts, wonderful for developing not only the physical skills but also the mental and emotional stress handling skills that maybe other sports and things might not foster so much. And just getting out and living in the world, hiking, exploring, getting dirty and being kids, playing and doing those things are really incredibly important. And unfortunately, a lot of kids don't get to play. They don't get to be kids anymore. They don't just, they don't get locked out of the house and given a stick and said, here, go entertain yourself, and so that's a critical piece that a lot of today's kids are not getting. Unplug. And this one, I'll be honest with you, this one's tough because we spend so much time in front of a screen, either your TV, video game, iPad, iPhone, whatever. We all typically spend too much time in front of a screen. I certainly do. And boy, sometimes you just gotta put it down and walk away from it. It's challenging, but it's worth it. And can really help these kids, because what we're training them to do is have really short attention spans. We're training them to be very we're training them to live in a highly stressed world, and frankly, there's too much stress put on screen time, in my opinion. So we need to limit that as much as we can. Utilize screen time as a reward for the kids doing their chores, doing their homework, getting their stuff done, and then they can have screen time. And then if they don't do what they're supposed to do, you can take it away and limit their screen time even more. But kids spend way too much time in front of screens. That's basically it. and adults do too. And finally, and most importantly, don't give up. Especially with older children who have had these issues for years and years, and maybe they've been on multiple medications and you've tried different things and it doesn't seem like things are working. Understand that the more good things you do, the better things will be. Also understand that nerves that fire together wire together. So there's a tendency for patterns to get deeply ingrained into especially a child's nervous system, and then they grow up into being adults and they still have those patterns. So it takes some time to get those patterns to change. And once they do change, then you can start to build new patterns. But it's really important to stay the course and understand that all healing takes time and repetition. Time and repetition, time and repetition. There is no way around that. Give whatever you're doing a chance to have an effect. We like to say that 1 + 1 = 11. So doing all the things that we've already listed together will have a much greater effect than just doing, one at a time. I mean, if you're under chiropractic care, wonderful. That's fantastic. That starts to build the foundation. But if those kids are eating a bunch of crap, from fast food joints all the time, or they're dosing on sugar all the time, or they have some kind of sensitivity to, say, gluten, and they're still being exposed to gluten and things like that, you can adjust them till the cows come home, and you can have an effect, but it will be much better if the overall stress levels and things from like I said, gluten and things like that are reduced. So again, my message is don't give up. Keep fighting the good fight. As long as you keep moving in the right direction, even though it may take some time, it's certainly worth it. There are ways to get these kids to not need to take medications and to be healthier and happier and more productive. So if you found this video helpful, please share it. We'd love to get your feedback. We're always trying to make these courses better. And I know that I didn't hit everything that we could have. So if I missed something that you'd like to learn more about, please send us, a note and let me know what I could do better next time. Appreciate your feedback, and thanks for watching. Again, you can, if you found this website, or if you found this on our website, obviously you know what our website address is. If you found this on YouTube, then you can go to our website, www.connectionchirowv.com. Again, my name is Dr. Brendan Halls, and I'm a pediatric and family wellness chiropractor. And you can get in touch with me through the website. And again, thanks for watching. Hope you have a wonderful day. Well, hello everyone. Thank you again for taking the time to watch this video. We hope it was insightful. We hope you learned something, and we hope you have a different perspective on ADHD and the problems associated with an out-of-tune spine and nervous system. If you found this information helpful, please share it with as many people as you possibly can. If you have any constructive criticism or comments, please feel free to comment below, or you can get in touch with me. My contact information will be in the description below, or you can find it on our website. Again, thank you for taking the time to watch. Please share the video, and we'll see you soon.